right now for an update on the pharmacy story we've been covering here in recent weeks. Cheaper medicines, less trips to the chemist. I thought it was a good idea, a bit of a win-win, but not now that I understand the detail. In fact, it puts your local pharmacy at risk of going out of business. Now, the government says it's all about the savings and they'll plough them back into community pharmacy, but that's an out-and-out lie. And now that the pharmacists have taken their campaign to their customers, to you, well, the blowback against the government's plans is worrying a lot of backbenchers, and they're demanding the Health Minister, Mark Butler, rethink the scheme. Joining me now to understand this even more, Anthony Tassone, Vice President of the Pharmacy Guild of Australia. Well, first of all, I've got to say, Anthony, when we talked about this a number of weeks ago, your campaign had just started. Now, clearly, you've got the campaign going out in the real world because basically every one of your pharmacies now is a campaign unit. It's an advocator. It's talking to customers. I think they're probably like me. Once they understood, beyond the government spin, what this might do to our local pharmacists, well, we're in your camp, right? So has the Health Minister now picked up the phone and apologised to pharmacy for getting it so wrong and offered to rework this policy?
Thank you, Peter. First of all, pharmacists and pharmacies across Australia, we want cheaper medicines for our patients. It's a good thing for their healthcare and a good thing to look after them. But the way this government's going about it is expecting that Australia's 6,000 local pharmacies and small businesses are funding it. It's like going to your local grocer and getting 2 litres of milk but only paying for 1 litre. I mean, it's not sustainable and it's not fair in the longer term. And when we explain that to patients, that it is the local pharmacy that is funding this cost of living measure that the Labor government trumpeted in their federal budget, they understand it's not fair because Australians are fair people. They understand a fair go. And the real concerns for pharmacies across Australia is being left with hard decisions that they'll be forced to make because the average impact has been modelled by an independent report Henry Ergas helped author along with Tulipwood Economics and the Griffith University. The average impact is $160,000 to $180,000 on average for each pharmacy, and that is going to result in over 20,000 job losses across Australia, 665 pharmacies closing and trading hours reduced if it goes ahead as announced. And that's not a win for patients. So we're all about cheaper medicines, but it's got to be done in a responsible and sustainable way. And to your question, has Minister Butler picked up the phone to apologise to the Pharmacy Guild? No, he hasn't. We have had dialogue with the government about our concerns on the implementation of this measure, but when the government is approached about our concerns, they rinse and repeat the same talking points, calling it a scare campaign and dismissing us. This is not a scare campaign, but I can tell you, Peter, pharmacies and pharmacists are scared about the impacts for patients that are going to disproportionately affect rural and regional areas and women with job losses. This is poor policy implementation.
Yeah, and you say women, of course, because if you go into a pharmacy, a lot of the assistants, a lot of the pharmacists now are women, of course. But let's go to that point about cranky backbenchers, because I know how the machine works. Cranky backbenchers are activated and they're in and out of the Treasurer's office or the Prime Minister's office, and the Minister gets pulled in and told to clean up the mess. I said at the top, this idea that there's billions of dollars being saved for the benefit of taxpayers, but that some of that money gets reinvested in your sector. I said that's an out-and-out lie. It is, but the government keeps repeating it. Explain why this is a falsehood.
It is a falsehood. So there's $1.2 billion of savings over the 4 years for reductions in Commonwealth remuneration to pharmacies in dispensing fee funding. And what the government's saying is that is being reinvested back into community pharmacies. And it's not a reinvestment, it's a furphy. It's a reallocation of funding. Instead of receiving funding from the patients themselves for things like opioid dependence treatment, methadone and buprenorphine for drug addiction, or provision of vaccines under the National Immunisation Program, instead of the patient paying the pharmacy, the Commonwealth Government is going to be paying the pharmacy. So that's a good thing for patients, no doubt. It reduces their costs. But what the government is paying pharmacies is less.
Anthony, let me just jump in there. It's a good thing for the drug addict. They're going to get their methadone paid for by the federal taxpayer, but it's sold as a win for pharmacists, and it's not. Keep going.
No. So, yeah, what we're receiving from the Commonwealth is less than what the patient was paying to the pharmacy beforehand. So it's not a reinvestment. It's not new money. It's a cut on a cut. And as George Costanza said on Seinfeld once, it's not a lie if you believe it. And if the government believes this lie and keeps on repeating the same falsehood over and over again, hoping that people will believe them, just because you keep repeating it doesn't make it true.
Well, keep going. I reckon you're starting to turn the tide if you've got backbenchers nervous with a government that's falling in the polls. I think that stuff really matters. Anthony Tassone, thank you.